Well, let's go back now to the situation in Georgia, where anti-government protests continue and flights from Russia have all been suspended. For more on this, we can cross to our guest, geopolitical analyst Anastasyia SHAPOCHKINA. Hello, thank you very much for being with us on France 24. Now, the Russians are putting Georgia under pressure. What are they hoping to achieve?
The Russians are feeling threatened by the current protests, which are supported by 4 Georgian opposition parties, at least 4, and also by the former Georgian president, Mikhail Saakashvili. The Russians are trying to send a signal to the current ruling party, the Georgian Dream, which is very pro-Russian, and since it's in power in 2012, since it came to power in 2012, the relations with Russia have improved, and they are trying to send a signal to this ruling party that Russia is supporting the ruling party, and that to the protests as well, that if the protests continue and if they grow more insistent and possibly more violent as well, there may be consequences, since when Russia is recalling the Russians from Georgia, it may also send a signal that greater, possibly forceful action is on the table.
But if it starts attacking, for example, Georgia's tourism industry, isn't that likely to fuel these protests further if the government does make changes to try and appease Moscow?
The Georgians are not particularly afraid of losing Russian tourists, and the Russian tourists are not necessarily very afraid of this type of protests as well. The people who go to Georgia and who've been going to Georgia even after the Russian-Georgian war obviously are not necessarily ideologically minded, and they are not moved to go to Georgia because of ideology. They are most likely to continue going no matter what. And the protesters have been very particular to underline that they are not there against the Russian people, but rather to protest against the possible, what they perceive as Russian intrusion in their political life.
And meanwhile, Georgia hasn't officially reacted. Absolutely. Georgia hasn't officially reacted to the Russian sanctions. Neither has Europe. How do you explain this diplomatic silence?
Georgian President Saakashvili has at first reacted to the protests themselves, and what she said 2 things which are conflictual, so to say, contradictory. First, she said that Russia is an enemy and an occupier, and second, she said that the protesters represent the 5th column of Russia. So after this big, we can say, media and communication blunder, it is logical that now the president is restraining herself from speaking further as a means to avoid further communications mistakes and make the situation even worse, which is already rather bad.
Anastasyia SHAPOCHKINA, thank you very much for having spoken to us on France 24.